Hi everybody, welcome to my talk today where I'm going to present 7 key tips to help you prepare a nursing presentation. So it's aimed at any of you on university courses where you have a presentation as an assessment, and hopefully these tips will help improve your presentation marks. Lots of you have asked for this talk. Some of you have struggled with presentation, some of you hate public speaking, but there's several ways that you can improve your presentation skills. I hope you find it useful. Remember to give me a thumbs up on YouTube if you do check out my other videos I upload on Sundays. They're all free on my YouTube channel, and my videos aim to support nurses' career development in some way. So I hope you find the talk helpful. So my first key tip is you need to keep to the task and the brief set. And a classic mistake is that a student misinterprets the assessment. It could be as simple as one word that leads them down the wrong path, and you risk losing marks by not doing what is being asked or even failing the assignment. So before you start planning, make sure you check in your module handbook. There should be clear guidance for the presentation assessment. And if you're confused at all, don't hesitate to check with the module lead early on to clarify what's expected. Do this before you start so that you're not wasting time going off on a tangent and then you've created this amazing presentation but it's not with the right area and the right focus. Another key tip is to check the marking grid. This is what you're actually going to be marked on. It's important because you can see exactly where the marker, what the marker's looking for, where they're going to allocate marks and percentages, and how it's spread out across the assessment grid. So that you might have specific headings such as organisation, integration of evidence, engagement with the audience. Different universities have got different marking grids, and you can see which sections of the marking grid are giving you most of your marks. And many students think they're going to be marked poorly if they're very nervous and they're stuttering over words. We all do it when we're nervous. Usually that's not the case. You may have a large percentage of marks linked to the content and the integration of your evidence, for example, your critical analysis, and is usually a good chunk of marks. So there's no reason why, even if you're very nervous, you don't feel that you're a really confident speaker, that you can't gain a lot of marks in a presentation. Part of keeping to the task and the brief set includes understanding keywords and the terms linked to the topic area, the assessment. So it's helpful to reflect on those keywords, the terms or the statement related to the presentation assessment. Do you know what the words and the terms mean? What do you have to do as part of this assessment? So for example, do you know what evaluate means, or what a service improvement plan is, or a quality improvement project is? It all depends on what presentation that you're given. It's not just the title, you also need to understand key healthcare terms related to the topic and how they relate to your presentation. So if you have to present, I don't know, a proposal for a change in practice, for example, you'll need to understand how this links to change management models. What are the different tools and models potentially? Check with the module lead and tutors if you're unsure. And if you need to provide a teaching or a lesson plan as part of your presentation assessment, you'll need a clear aim, objective or learning outcomes related to your presentation. I've got a video on how to write aims, objectives, learning outcomes and SMART goals that you might find helpful. So I have some videos on my YouTube channel if you need to devise aim, objectives, learning outcomes, as I said. But also if you're unsure what certain words mean, I have videos on terms linked to risk management, quality improvement, service evaluation, and I've summarised some keywords and terms in these areas. And I've also got a whole range of videos on leadership, quality improvement, advanced practice and education, just in case you have any of those topics for future assignments. So tip 2, there usually needs to be evidence that you have used a clear structure in your presentation. You're aiming to demonstrate your organisational skills, that you've used a systematic approach and show off your time management skills using this clear structure. So similar to any assignment, you should make the structure of your presentation clear, for example using a simple introduction, then a main body, and then you've got your final conclusion. In your introduction you state your aims, objectives, link to the assessment, set the scene, the task set and state what you're going to do. You may just state aims and objectives verbally or write them on an introductory PowerPoint slide. It really depends on how you're doing your presentation. Main body, you can spend the most amount of time systematically covering the topic. You need to think about how you want your main main section to flow? Do you want to start with a creative quiz, present some statistics, background information, then analysis, presenting the main topic? Really depends on your presentation, but this is where you can take some advice from your tutors. That's what they're there for. Then finally, summarising what you've achieved and covered in a concluding slide, for example. And your conclusion could summarise what you found, and it's good to leave the audience with a final thought for the future. Check the structure that your universities have asked you to use, because often they will provide guidance on the structure in module handbooks as well, and different unis have different structures sometimes. Think about your presentation method. Many students use PowerPoint, it's very popular with students, but posters or group work, may be suitable as well depending on your topic, and it can work very well. But spend time thinking about what would work with your tutors and discuss before you decide which method you're going to use. You need to keep to the time allocated as part of keeping to the structure, and sometimes people assessing presentations will have an alarm sometimes, or a little clock that goes off, and there'll be marks allocated relating to you keeping to time and your organisational skills. And by practicing your presentation, you can gauge what you need to cut out or what you might need to add, and you can time it before you go into that assessment. Do you need to summarise references and signpost in those slides rather than reading out large chunks of text, for example? And if the marking grid has given you a large percentage of marks for critical analysis, then you don't need large amounts of description. It's not required. You can signpost. It's the analysis that's important. Summarising and signpost background literature, it helps to reduce your words in slides as well. So if, for example, you wanted to present an overview of national standards of or laws, let's say Nursing Midwifery Council standards of proficiency for registered nurses, you wouldn't need to present all 7 platforms. You might bullet the platforms, and maybe have a link and link to the NMC website that your audience can read later, or you may have a handout with more information. But your analysis might be more about the critique of the proficiencies, what works, what needs to improve, how these proficiencies relate to your talk, and you're integrating the evidence into your talk. So that's where you would decrease the amount of description potentially. So tip 3, aim to check your presentation for mistakes before you present. You don't want to lose marks unnecessarily for errors, as the presentation's marked to the same standard as an essay. Check for spelling, grammatical errors or referencing errors before you present. Don't try to squeeze too much font into a PowerPoint or Prezi slide. PowerPoint, for example, the minimum font size they recommend is 24 points, but always check the module presentation guidance and what that states. Usually PowerPoint recommends 6 to 8 lines per slide, so you need to summarise key points, for example using bullets, or you could use a visual image or a quote, for example, to make a point, and you can use notes then to talk around your pointers on your slides. What you shouldn't have is loads of massive chunks of small writing on slides and reading out vast amount of text from slides because your audience can't see it. I would recommend using prompt cards, so you have notes there to read from potentially, because so you don't forget. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, for example, I have these little lined cards that I use, and then I hole punch, I don't know if you can see, I hole punch and then put a little string through. So if I was reading one slide, for example, as a student, I might turn my page over and I'm not losing and dropping lots of papers on the floor. And so that's perfectly acceptable to have some notes in front of you of your key points. Another tip, and also if you have lots of wads of paper and it drops on the floor, you can completely lose your thread. Another tip is what you can do is when you've read out sentences on here, and I used to do it a lot when I first started teaching, I'd put a red dot at the end of a sentence or a paragraph. And I would consciously look up at the audience because I tended to talk very fast, and some of the feedback I got on teaching courses, this was a tip that I was given. So if you naturally talk too much or you forget to look at your audience, it's helpful to have that little red dot, and then also you can take a breath and take your time. It slows you down, and look up at your audience. And I know that if you do speech and drama lessons, for example, they teach you to do that, how important it is to engage and look up at your audience. So I would say putting the red dots on here helps, so you don't forget, especially if you're very nervous. One thing to remember is that very few people are natural orators and presenters. Often they've done teaching courses, speech and drama. Many nurse leaders and presenters will use teleprompters, for example, in conferences. It can be very difficult to tell, you know, on YouTube and on not on YouTube, but on TikTok, for example, or on Instagram, they've got prompts and scripts in front of them with these teleprompters. And it takes years to hone those presentation skills, but there are techniques that help. And as with anything, the more you practice, the better you're going to get. And if you prepare, it'll be easier on the day of your presentation. I was awful when I first started my teaching certificate. I was teaching at the bedside, and it was only through practice I developed my confidence to be able to teach at groups and to lecture at university. And I made those mistakes, seeing what worked for me and what didn't work for me. Teaching courses are very helpful to develop this key transferable skill, and it is a key skill. You need to present to groups of people. If you think about it, nursing handover is presenting to others. Multidisciplinary meeting or a case meeting or a ward meeting, you're presenting to others. You need to get your point across. And if you go for future posts as well, a lot of interviews now are asking for presentations from, say, a band 6 onwards, because those posts are competitive. So it's a good skill to develop. And if you can get on a teaching certificate or a postgraduate diploma in teaching, it's very helpful for your long-term career. So tip 4, a key part of your presentation is to integrate an evidence base, and that includes analysis, synthesis, evidence in your presentation according to your module handbook and the assessment criteria. So always review that criteria, your marking criteria. Is the presentation specifically asking you to critique a tool or present a proposal according to specific guidance, or is it up to you to find a more open topic of your choice? So it depends on that assessment. So when reviewing the literature, you would do that the same as you would an assignment, and then pick out key evidence, standards or research to present. So is this topic linked to national NHS or health and safety standards? Is it linked to legislation or professional NMC standards, for example? Do you need to place the topic in context as a whole, linked to up-to-date literature review, or use a personal reflection? Again, it depends on your topic, and you should be guided by your module leads and your presentation guidance. And my key tip for presentations is to be selective in the presentation when presenting that literature and that evidence that's underpinning your presentation. It's the quality of evidence and research and literature rather than the quantity. It's good to focus on widely referenced seminal works of literature and choosing those key research studies to present, the same as you would in an assignment. So if there's been a recent literature review in this area or a concept analysis, is it a widely referenced tool? So if you were looking at quality improvement, the PDSA cycle's widely referenced and often used for quality improvement. And compare and contrast literature, studies or models depending on your topic. So you need to justify the literature chosen, the tool chosen. The national guidance is always good because it's easy to justify. If there's a lack of literature or research in an area, you can state that there's a gap and conclude the need for more research. You usually need to critically analyse the same as you would an assignment. So you'd see a section on your marking grid usually on analysis of literature or referenced literature used. So you need to sort of give that analysis as pointers in your talk. And the references should be on the slides and have a reference list. Some universities will ask for the reference list to be separated because it's very hard to read references on a slide because the narrative can be quite small. But if you're talking about a PDSA tool, for example, a quality improvement tool, you would, or I don't know, the 4 pillars of advanced practice, you should have a reference. So for the 4 pillars of advanced practice, you might have Kim Manley's was the seminal work on the 4 pillars of advanced practice. I've got a video on the 4 pillars of advanced practice with that reference in if you need it. But you would put the author and the year at the bottom of the slide, so that you get marks for integrating references into your slides. You don't just have lots of slides with no references at all on them. So tip 5, try to be creative and engage with your audience to make your presentation stand out and for it to be engaging. There's usually marks for engaging with your audience and creativity. So you could start your presentation, for example, presenting some interesting statistics to start to set the scene. Did you know that 50% of whatever, or which of these national statistics or percentages do you think is correct, and throw a question out to your audience. You don't always have to give the answer straight away, so you can have this two-way conversation. So you can use quizzes, you can present a case study, use a personal reflection to set the context of a topic, and it captures the audience's attention. It allows them to give their view as well. So if you talk a little bit about your experience, then you can say, has anyone else experienced this, for example, to get a bit of a discussion going. And also you can engage audiences by making them do something, so setting a task for them. You might get them to use some flip chart paper to make some sort of game up. Or you may want to use other visual or auditory aids. Can data national statistics also be presented as a visual chart, for example? Can an evidence base or study results be represented by an image? What's your core message? There is so much out there nowadays with podcasts, you've got YouTube videos too, and you might use a photo image. So you can be quite creative, but you must always adhere to copyright and review your university guidance and rules on that. There might be a limit for how long you can present an extract of a video, for example, or a bit of a podcast, for example. So you might have a limit of 1 minute for your presentation. And another way is to use a practical group exercises to increase insight and awareness. And that again increases learner engagement. So I remember a student many years ago asking the other students to breathe through a straw for, I think it was about 2 minutes or 3 minutes, as long as they could tolerate. They didn't want anyone fainting. And this was to give them the feeling of somebody whose respiratory system was compromised, for example, through asthma or chronic obstructive airway disease. And one of the learners' objectives was to increase the learner's insight and awareness of how it feels for a patient who can't get hold of their inhalers, for example. And she achieved that really creatively through this group exercise. So what I would say is to keep practical exercises very simple. If you see people on TV doing demonstrations, they're often very simple to get a point across, but it's quite interesting to see those in presentations, and it means you'll get more marks for creativity. Tip 6, prepare and practice well in advance. I've been a module lead, I've marked assignments and I've marked presentations. I know how nerve-wracking and difficult presentations are for students, but please don't think because you're not a natural presenter that you cannot pass and you cannot do well in a presentation. I've given you lots of tips, and the earlier you start and seek support from your module leads to make sure you're on the right lines, the easier it will be. The best way to overcome nerves is to prepare well in advance and practice talking out loud. Think creatively, so the focus isn't always on you necessarily. Make one of your peers read out a quote, for example, or feedback on a group exercise. It doesn't always have to be you talking. If you use visual aids, it again takes the onus off you. It really depends on what the brief is, what's linked to your presentation, and how long you have. You might not have enough time to present a group exercise if it's a short presentation, but by practicing, you make all those stutters and mistakes before your actual presentation. It really helps on the day, and you can see if the presentation works to time, and practicing out loud several times beforehand really helps you to be familiar with what you're presenting. As I said, use prompting notes in case you lose your thread. You might not need them. You might be very good at remembering. I couldn't do a presentation without some prompting, but they're there if you need to refer to them. Do not worry if things don't go to plan. It happens to everybody. Have a glass of water near in case your mouth goes dry. And if you're feeling excessively nervous and it's starting to affect your mental health, please seek support from module leads and the university. You might be able to present just to your tutors rather than to your peers, but you have to inform your module leads and go through a certain process. But where possible, with that practice, it'll help calm those nerves. So tip 7, now you don't have to do this, but I think it's nice to leave the audience with a final thought at the end of a presentation or any talk. So after a conclusion, use a punchline, a quote, could be a visual aid, a photo, an audio, or just a final question or sentence, just to leave your audience thinking about your topic and the future. So this is my final thought, the end of my video for you all. Always ask if you are struggling with your presentation, and that's my final thought. So have to think about what you might use for your final thought. I have lots more videos on my YouTube channel. If you're interested, there's a few topics there. If you have any questions at all, if you're worried about anything at all, don't hesitate to put questions in the comments in YouTube. If you would rather contact me personally, privately, you can DM me on Twitter or my website. If you're interested in any of my books, the description below there is links to buy the books as well. And good luck. I wish you all well with your presentations, and I hope some of those tips that I've given will help.